Alright, this video is going to be my first attempt at running a session of the Star Trek Adventures Captain's Log solo role-playing game. This is, of course, a trimmed-down version of the original Star Trek Adventures, designed for use by a single gamer, or for a more collaborative multiplayer game that's maybe a little more rules-light, a little more storytelling-focused than the original game is. I've already gone through the process of creating a character as well as a starship for the character, going through the rules for character creation in the Captain's Log PDF. So let me go ahead and start to introduce you to who we've got here. I will be playing as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Paulsen, who has recently been promoted to Lieutenant Commander and Executive Officer of the U.S.S. Jemison. I'm not going to go into all of the details about her. A lot of the stuff I'd like to get to in play. Frankly, I don't know much more than is on this page. I'd like to kind of see how things turn out in play itself. As far as the U.S.S. Jemison is concerned, it is an older Shepard-class ship, which is essentially designed, to my understanding, around the same time that the Walker-class ship was designed, specifically as a kind of smaller, lighter, quicker to build ship than the Walker class. The Walker class ship was, of course, the U.S.S. Shenzhou is the major example of the Walker class that we have, as seen in the first episode of Star Trek Discovery. According to the book here, the Walker class and the Shepard class, this guy here, were designed as kind of replacements for the Daedalus class at the end of the 22nd century. So it's my assumption that the USS Jemison has been around, been flying for the last 40 or so years. So it's a fair assessment to say that she's on her last legs. I've also already prepared everything, written the first officer's log for the first introductory scene for this episode, this mission, whatever you want to call it, as well as rolling up the variety of NPCs and various crew members we're likely to need. I think at this point the best thing to do, just go to the quick reference page here, is to get into the first officer's log, and then I will walk through a little bit of what I discovered and had assumed and presumed based on my rolling on the probability matrices before I wrote this. First Officer's Log, Stardate 2173.4. I find myself on Bukitsa Mu, standing in what is locally referred to as the graveyard. What should stand as a reminder of the dangers of conflict and war feels tarnished by the conflict the USS Jemison has been called to intermediate. On a more personal note, this is the first opportunity I've had since assuming command of my position to lead an away mission. Captain Malik likes to see things firsthand. Today, however, he's been called to the capital to speak with Queen Teato with regards to the global protests. Captain Malik encouraged me to bring a landing party to the graveyard to get a better understanding of the situation here. I'm sure he meant the local protests, but as soon as we transported down, I found myself drawn to the site. That there are nearly 500 million buried here. That's where we begin. So what are the assumptions we can make as we head into the very first game loop? I've narrated a beginning. Now we need to narrate to the first task, and then we'll eventually get to rolling dice. But we need to figure out what that first task is going to be. So what are the assumptions we've got to work on? First off, we know we're on a planet that was torn apart by war at some point in the past. They're obviously well past it. This is original series era, so they are most likely a warp-capable species. But some kind of war absolutely destroyed this place. There are 500 million buried in this one site that is called the graveyard. It wouldn't be a stretch of the imagination to expect that there are other graveyards that hold lesser volumes or are of lesser cultural impact. Perhaps this graveyard was the site of some major catastrophe closer to the end of the war. That's sort of the assumption I'm going on. We know that this planet currently is ruled by a monarchy, which is on the surprising side. We know in the Federation there are not a ton of monarchies. I believe there are some rules regarding Federation membership that preclude a single ruler in that sort of sense. I'd have to check my notes on that again. I don't have any of that information currently handy, although Memory Alpha is definitely going to be my friend as far as running this system. Let's see. And they don't have any pages on monarchies, so for the moment, we'll leave that alone. The other thing that we've learned is that there's some kind of political unrest going on. There are global protests, enough so that, in all likelihood, the U.S.S. Jemison has been called, specifically Captain Malik has been called to speak with the monarch of Bukitsa Mu. And there is a protest currently going on at the graveyard. And I think that's where we're going to begin. The graveyard is a site. So we see the first officer wearing command gold. She's brought a couple of other officers with her, including, let's see, I developed 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let's see, there are 5 officers. I happen to have a D10 handy. Normally, you're supposed to stick to D20s, since that's what they go with. So let's go ahead and do that, actually. There are 5, so we'll do every 4 and see how many of the other officers that I've already generated will be joining Commander Paulsen on this away mission. I rolled a 6, so that would be in the second category. So 2 of them. And we'll go with the Chief Science Officer, Lieutenant Eric DeWitt, as well as the between the Helm Officer and... Actually, no, we'll go between the Chief Medical Officer and the Tactical Officer. So, Chief Medical Officer, I think that's probably a 50-50 shot, so we'll do 1 through 10 for the first and 11 through 20 for the second. 11 through 20. So, that will be Petty Officer Chloe Bassett will be joining as well. So, we've got Lieutenant Eric DeWitt and Petty Officer Bassett joining on this away mission. And it's likely that there are a couple of other members of security on hand as well. There are protests happening. This is a heated site, so it's not a huge stretch of the imagination, once again, to expect that the captain would order caution on behalf of the away team. So we see we'll call it 5 members of the away party, the landing party, standing on a platform that overlooks this wasteland. There are, at this point, no longer any signs of graves. All of the surface of the soil, the rock, whatever this looks like, will have settled back in. But there is no biological life, nothing growing, no animals moving, about as far as the eye can see. So they're standing looking over this barren wasteland. And I think it would probably be a mixture of bare rock and kind of dirt and gravel stretched out to the horizon. As the camera pans back, we see the 5 members of the away team standing there, and there are a number of kind of pedestals set up across this balcony. And the balcony itself, we see as the camera continues to pan back, could probably hold several thousand people. As you know, this is, for all intents and purposes, a tourist site. It's like visiting the 9/11 Memorial or the Vietnam Wall in Washington, D.C. Any sort of war memorial like that. Or a Holocaust museum. That's another good example of something like this. We see, as the camera continues to pan, there's a citizen of Bukitsa Mu. Let's see, how likely is it that a Kitsu, or a kitsen. We'll call them kitsens. How likely do we think it is that they are, in the typical TOS fashion, very much humanoid? I think it's somewhat probable. So let's go ahead and roll for that. Yep, roll the 1. That's the Starfleet Delta symbol on these official dice from the original release. So they are very much typical human-looking, but they've got some minor twists. And I think there's a lovely chart in here somewhere for wounds, and we can figure out what part of them looks different. Probability matrices, let's see. Let's see. Where are you injured? Page 316. We'll just use this as an example and see what bit of them looks different. And with that, I rolled an 18. So their internal mechanisms are all in different places. They've probably got different organs. And additionally, we'll say that their legs, they've got feet. We'll call it feet. Their feet are very clearly non-human. They've got 3 toes, and their feet are narrow, much more like a monkey than humanoid or human feet. I think that's a reasonable assumption to make. So let's go back to 328 here. All right. So we see a Kitsen standing at one of these pedestals, and they're tapping on a touchscreen display of some sort, scrolling through, and the camera will pan in, and we see just a very, very long list of names, and eventually they tap on a name, and they see a list of information about that person. They see no surviving family members, all family members killed in the attack, information of that sort. And so then the camera pans to a field of kind of a roped off, chained off section of the balcony area, and you see 1,000 Kitsens all standing there, holding signs and chanting some phrase. With where the camera is, we're too far back. We're not getting anything from the universal translator, so we hear a little bit of the Kitsen language. It sounds much more like one of the let's see. Sounds much more like Arabic or one of the African languages than it does one of the Romance languages, with obviously some twists and something unique about it. Then we see Commander Paulsen. She steps back from the balcony and starts to walk towards the protest. And this is where we get, I think, to our first task. We'll hear the universal translator kick in and hear them chant. I don't know what the exact words are, but they'd be chanting about. This is entirely a protest about self-governance. They don't think that it's necessary to be living under a monarch anymore. And as the kind of camera tilts around, you see signs about just because God, and it would be some god's name. Actually, we can come up with a name. Let's go to a probability matrix, and I think there's a lovely little name generator. Yep. So it's going to be a one-syllable name. No, we should probably do a 2-syllable name. So we're going to roll 2 dice, or first 1 dice to see... No, 2 dice. We're going to roll 2 dice. Excuse me, I have forgotten. We're going to roll 1 die to see which progression we use as far as the syllables. And then we're going to roll 2 dice for as many syllables as we have to pick them out. So I rolled a 10. We're going to go D-A-B-C. So in this case, because it's 2 syllables, we just need D-A. I rolled a 4 and a 12. So let's go Eti. Etite, I don't know that I like that. Teeti? Let's go backwards. Teeti. Or, let's see, Da Ufu. Ufugo. Ufugo is a much better god name. So the name of their god is Ufugo. Just because Ufugo created us and set us running does not mean that we should stick to that plan for eternity. You see signs of that nature. You see your people are starving while you're sitting in a palace. All sorts of things on that nature. So now we need to get into the first task. We know that Commander Paulsen has been required or has been commanded to begin an investigation of her own at this particular site. So we want her to start that investigation. And how is she going to do that? I think we're going to handle that with... I think we could do a presence command test just to see... There's a few different ways I could see going about this. We could do presence command. This would be much more the investigative route, kind of asking and answering questions, being personable through the process. That's much more the presence side of things. If she had a higher security, I would say we'd go present security and go through this more like an investigator would. You could also do insights and security. Things like that would be reasonable as well, but I think command would work fairly well here. So, let me double check how the tasks work, because it has been a minute. Oh, actually, no, I know exactly how this works. So, compared to the original Star Trek adventures, there's no difficulty class. You just need one success to complete a task. If you get an extra success, you gain a momentum. So, in this case, we are trying to roll under our value of presence command, which is a 15. I've got my 2 dice. Let's see what we get. Does she have an applicable focus? That is an interesting question. Composure, no, I don't think any of those work out too well. And we got lucky here. Our first task, we rolled a 15 and an 18. The 15, however, will succeed. So we do succeed at the task. She's trying to find out what the local opinion is. And I have my handy mission tracker here on paper. So I'm going to fill in the first Starfleet Delta, and I can show what that looks like. Here's the mission tracker. In fact, I can just do that. Fill in the first Delta, and I'll fill it in on my own printed copy as well. It's kind of cathartic to fill it in. It's like a coloring book. And it's fair to say that I do not know for sure that I'm doing all of this correctly. This is my first time playing, and I have not seen an example yet. For the first bits, I have taken a look at Jim Johnson's lovely series over on YouTube, which I will try to link if I can remember it. But this is how we're going to stand for the moment. So our first task is a success. So as Sarah's walking around and talking with various members of the crowd, she learns that the people are very agitated about how the Crown has been handling what they're calling, let's see, what they're calling the wreckage. And because of the success, Lieutenant or Commander Paulsen learns that the wreckage was a recently discovered, what she would think of immediately as a colony ship. Yeah, I think that sounds right. So there's a colony ship, and it's old. It's incredibly old. It seems to, at the very least, predate the war that eventually caused the graveyard. The Crown has sent people in to investigate, but there's been no public releases of information, which has been concerning to the people, as well as, they just want to know what's going on. They think they have a right to that information, And I think, given what we know about Commander Paulsen, she would agree that information like that, historical information, should freely be shared. So that's, I think, the results of the first bit of the mission, the first task. Let's see how the quick reference, the core game loop, what that goes for. Okay. So we've rolled the dice, we've seen the impact, she's gotten some information from a variety of people she's talked to. The rest of her crew is spread out, and we see that the protests are a mixture of things. It is frustration with the crown that's been building and kind of waxing and waning through the centuries. But it all seems to be a kind of old-fashioned sort of monarchy. The kind where the monarch has been specifically put in place by a god of some sort. And the name I didn't even remember, didn't write it down. But the god of the Kitsans has put their monarch on the throne and has passed it down through the centuries through direct descendants. The people are tired of this. They have slowly started to work their way into the stars and learned through first contact with the Federation and other civilizations that this is not a common practice. It's rare to see a monarchy anymore in the galaxy, especially once a civilization has reached warp travel. So the people are frustrated, especially those who are more marginalized, those who don't have as much. This is, of course, typical in human culture as well, in our modern society. So we get a lot of that sort of information, that the wreckage did not spawn these protests, but boy did it inflame them. Okay, so let's see. That's the outcome. We've seen the impact. We've gotten some information. It's all very fascinating. Of course, as viewers, if we were to watch this as an episode, we're wondering, okay, so what's actually in the wreckage? Why are they hiding the information? Has there been some trouble going on in the wreckage? That's the sort of things we should be thinking. Does it have something to do with the war that caused the graveyard? All sorts of questions like that. And I do want to point out as well, I literally have... how many words is that? Not very many words written down to describe this mission. I've got 56 words to describe the mission we're playing out. I've got a few more words than that to describe the planet. About 100 words to describe the planet. And the rest of my Google Doc is NPCs. Very brief descriptions of everything, and most of what I've written was that first officer's log that I walked through in the very beginning. 150 words there. So, all of this that I've done so far has been off the top of my head with the dice rolls and just based on the little that I know. The theme that this mission takes place in, this is a diplomacy mission to investigate civil unrest, and there's something to do with a salvageable wreck involved. That's basically all the information that I have. Now, I think we want to drive up the tension. The first act of something should see, if we were talking about an episode, the way I would write this, I would have, of the 15 tasks that we have to do, which again we can see in the mission tracker. Let's call this, we'll call this the graveyard. So in the mission tracker for the graveyard, we see there are 15 tasks that we need to accomplish. The first 5 are in the first act. That should be kind of the rising tension. The second act, we should see really a massive increase in tension, mainly getting new information in the first, really ramp up the tension in the second, and by the last 3, we need to be resolving that tension to a nice conclusion. So, if I were calling this an episode, I'd have the first 2 tasks, or even just the first task, be before the theme song, and then we dive right into the second task after the theme song. So we need something big at the end of the first task, which essentially will become the second task, to cut away to the theme song. And at this point, we're in the middle of a protest. We've seen on Earth how protests can go. Something is going to happen to kick this off, and it's going to become a full-on riot. So in this case, let's go back to our probability matrix. I know how I want to play this. I think this is going to be the way that's most interesting. But do we want... How do we want this to become violent? I think it's going to become violent. Are they going to be able to see who's caused the violence, or is it going to come from... Actually, I don't think we need the probability matrix for this. They hear a shout from way back in the sea of protesters, and there are probably, I think I said about 1,000, I believe I said. So somewhere in the midst of all of those protesters, they hear a shout, and then there's some pushing and shoving, and then the sound of a disruptor goes off, and a scream. And that's where we cut to the second task. First we cut to our theme song, but I have not made a theme song for the U.S.S. Jemison, because that's not my jam. But we cut to our second task. We know that there's something going on. A full-on riot breaks out. There are people stampeding. The chain gets broken down. Now, the real question is, does the landing party try to get an emergency transport back up to the ship, or do they get involved to try and fix things? So, I think it's somewhat improbable that Commander Paulsen would just try and evacuate. I think she wants to try and fix the situation. So we will go with the somewhat improbable on the table. And this is the somewhat improbable that they'd transport. So a 1 through a 7, they transport. 8 through a 20, they stay and try and fix it. So let's see what we've got. 16, they're going to stay and try and fix it. Awesome. We do have our tactical officer. Fantastic. We rolled for that earlier. We also have our science officer. He's not going to be of much help. But our second task, I think... we've already done a presence command task. So I think we go for presence security. And I don't have stats rolled up for my security officer. So let's go with... We'll just do it for Commander Paulsen as I drop my dice. We're going to have her attempt to shout out, attempt to calm the crowds. She finds... one of the closest pedestal that has all the information on the deceased in the graveyard. She rushes up to that and starts to climb on top of it. And she does have a Type 2 phaser with her, standard fare for an away mission. And I think she'd try and fire the phaser in the air just to get everybody's attention, and then would give an eloquent speech about the necessity of peaceful protest. That's what she was going to try to do. Whether or not that works, we're going to find out. And I think present security is fitting for this. Although one could argue fitness security would be... If this were a normal Star Trek Adventures, I would say it'd be fitness security followed by something else. But in this case, present security is just fine. So we need a 13 or lower. And I think we can include composure here. So a 2 or a lower... is an extra success. A 2. That's fantastic. So I rolled a 2 and a 19. Skirting the edge on those complications. The 2 in this case will generate us 1 momentum. For the moment, I'm going to use this Viking coin replica I've got as my momentum tracker. You can only have up to 1 momentum at a time. And I believe I basically can just use it as a reroll. So I will keep that banked for when I need it. But we see Commander Paulsen, and that is a success, so I'm going to mark that on both trackers. Doop, 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 doop. Fantastic. So that's our second success. We're on a roll. Commander Commander Paulsen kind of, as I said, jumps up and starts to talk to the crowd and does manage to get them calmed down for the most part. But as the camera pans around, we see that there are already probably more than 100 people who've been injured. And as she gets herself down from the pedestal, we see a number of security forces, Kitson security forces, come in. And everything looks like it's going to burst back open again. And I think we're going to get into our third task as well. So, we see that the security forces are coming in. They're coming in full force. They've got disruptors. I don't think that they would have... They've got a stun setting on their disruptors, but they're looking to make arrests and not necessarily be as helpful. So we'll see Commander Paulsen rush over to whoever looks to be in charge of the security forces, and it's very clear from the Starfleet uniforms that they're not a part of this crowd. So the sergeant in charge will kind of roll his eyes a little bit as Starfleet walks up. And it's clear from this interaction that a lot of people on this planet are not in favor of the Federation. The Federation, at this point in time, is... their policy of non-interference is very much limited to pre-warp civilizations. They have no qualms interfering in other places at this point in time, at least not to the extent that they will later. So she walks up. I think she'd try to use reason security to get the sergeant to back off, make a well-reasoned argument that there's 1,000 people here, the scuffle's over, there's no need to make any arrest, it's important to get these people medical attention. Trying to step into the situation now is only going to make things worse. Alright, so we have an 11 to get. I've got a 50-50 shot on each die. So, let's see what we can do. Okay, we rolled a 4 and a 17. I keep skirting that edge. She manages to talk down the sergeant in charge of security around here. And we've got our third success. And I think it's at this point, as the sergeant kind of nods and gestures to a couple of his men, that we would end up seeing... we would end up seeing medical personnel come in, and as they kind of push through and start to treat the injured, we would see the sergeant probably get a communication on a communications device, not too similar to the Federation communicator. Maybe it looks a little more old-fashioned. A little more British is how I wanted to put it, but that's... I don't know what that would look like. What I do picture is the old... There's what movie is it? 3 Days of the Condor, I think. We see an old telephone repair phone that the repairmen would bring with them up when they're going up wires to kind of plug in and see if everything's working. It's got a receiver here and a microphone here. I can probably pull up a picture of it. I don't know if that's the right word for it. No, it's not. Ah, yes, Bell System, Western Electric. Yeah, Bell System telephone. I want to see what this looks like again. The Lineman Repair Handset. Here we go. And this is an image I found on eBay, so not perhaps the most useful, but this is roughly what they'd look like. They've got just a basic handset sort of thing in line with this. Kind of a funny shape, very clearly based on an old design. But he receives a communication, kind of holds it up to his ear, and then it's a little bit smaller than what I just showed, and clips it back on his belt, and turns to Commander Paulsen and says, "You're wanted at the palace. If you'd please come with me, we'll take you there right away." Okay. That ends our third task and will transition us into the fourth. We're still not exactly sure what's going on. At this point, I anticipate that the second act, and again, I'm ad-libbing all of this, that the second act takes place entirely at the wreckage. So what we need to see is in the fourth and fifth tasks here, we want to see Commander Paulsen meet back up with Captain Malik at the palace, and however that happens, we need, within the fifth task, to get to the wreckage. That's what we're pushing for, as far as the story is concerned. Whether or not the dice allow that, we'll see. It could be easy. It could just be that the way the negotiations have worked out, maybe we have to do a negotiation task here to see if the Federation can get access to the wreckage in order to kind of settle the civil unrest. I think that's what the current opposition leader would be calling for. He wants Federation intervention. He wants someone from the Federation, even if the monarchy won't allow the people to understand. The opposition leader wants someone from the Federation to take a look at it, because they trust the Federation to be true to their word. I think that's essentially what would be happening. I'm going to take a quick little break, and then we'll be right back. All right. Apologies for the slight gap in recording. Hopefully that was smooth. Had to get some water. Surprise, surprise. So we left off at the end of the third task with the away team being taken onto essentially a police shuttle. And it's clear from the design structure, I think, of the shuttle that this was... It's basically a paddy wagon. It's designed to take a whole bunch of prisoners to prison should they need to. And I think, based on the very small amount of information I have for Petty Officer Chloe Bassett, that we would be witness to a conversation between her and Commander Paulsen on the shuttle. It's very clear to her that the police here are just trying to do their job, and that she doesn't seem to respect the what's the right word? It looked to her like the protest was under the surface volatile, that at the drop of a match the entire thing could light up, which is what we saw. She thinks that they just narrowly averted a disaster, and suggested that maybe the security force should have been allowed to make arrests, that would solve something like this in the first place. And Paulsen would suggest that isn't the right to protest a core tenet of Federation belief, that if you can't speak your mind on a subject in a peaceful manner, that isn't there something wrong with the system? So we would see some sort of conversation like that between the two characters. I don't know that either one would make any headway in convincing the other at this point in time. Commander Paulsen doesn't know Petty Officer Bassett very well. She was previously the helmsman on the U.S.S. Jemison before she was promoted. So she didn't have to interact with tactical very often, and even still, it's on the rarer side for the chief tactical officer to be enlisted and be quite so young. So I think it's a good assumption that Petty Officer Bassett would be also new to her station, perhaps promoted around the same time that that Commander Paulsen was. But anyways, that's beside the point. We see the shuttle gets taken to the capital, and we see a magnificent palace there. And of course, this would be a matte painting. We're doing this TOS style for the moment. It's a matte painting. I kind of picture it like something in between the Cloud Minders and the matte painting we see in The Cage that was recently adapted in the Lotus Eaters, I believe the episode was called, of Strange New Worlds. Is that what it was called? Among the Lotus Eaters. So that palace on Rigel 7, between that and the Cloud Minders palace, is essentially what we're seeing here on Bukitsa, let's see. What did I call this place? Bukitsa Mu. That's right. So that's essentially what we're seeing. It's incredibly lavish. It's obvious that they have spent far more of their resources on the construction and now maintenance of this place than they have on even the memorial at the graveyard. Although to have something that opulent there would be obviously in poor taste. So that's what we see. We see the shuttle land out front, and the captain walks out. He is probably he's human, in his 50s, late 50s maybe. He walks out. He's got kind of a big, bushy mustache. Think Sam Elliott. Graying hair that's swept back. Not as luscious as Captain Pike's in Strange New Worlds, but a little more gray than that even. And his mustache has still got some dark in it, but it's very clearly more gray than the black hair he used to have at this point. And he walks with a little bit of a limp. It's not too pronounced, but he meets the police force shuttle as it lands, and pulls Commander Paulsen aside and says something like, I heard what... I'm going to end up talking like Sam Elliott. I heard what happened over at the graveyard. Everything all right? Our people all clear? And Paulsen would agree that it was tense there for a minute, but they got through it just fine. They did what they could to help. Captain seems to be pleased with this, and then would tell Paulsen that he has spoken with the opposition leader, a male Kitson named Rudulag. Rudulag wants, as I mentioned earlier, I think I mentioned this earlier, he wants the Federation to intercede if the monarchy is not willing to tell the people what is in the wreckage. He wants the Federation to go in and at least take a look around. He trusts the Federation to be true to their word. Doesn't necessarily trust the Federation, but he trusts that they're going to be honest about what they find. Even if they're not allowed to tell everything, he knows they're not going to lie to him, which he doesn't believe of the monarchy. And the captain finds this a reasonable request. It's a very fair compromise, and he's been trying all morning to get Teato, the queen, to accede to this request. Unfortunately, she has been incredibly reticent, and it is this is the first point that we learn that it is a matriarchal society. So she has less respect for the captain because he's male. So the captain asks for Commander Paulsen to go and do the negotiating on this front. And I think this is where we get to our next task. We're going to essentially do a negotiation. I don't think composure is going to work here. Let's see. I think we can probably go with reason command for this. So it'd be another 13. I don't think presence is going to work when you're trying to talk with a monarch who, in theory, is supposed to exude presence and be a little more even-headed. We would want to hit her with I think Commander Paulsen would expect to hit her with a well-reasoned argument, as opposed to charming her into letting them explore. There's obviously a reason that they're not sharing this information, and because of that, I think reason would be the right thing here. So we're looking for a 13, and again, I don't think any of this is going to help, so let's roll for it. Okay, that's classic my bad dice rolls. I rolled 2 20s. I am, however, going to spend my momentum, and I believe I can reroll one of those 20s. I'm going to look that up again, because that's important. Momentum, let's see here. You can spend your momentum to reroll a single d20. Yep, I'm definitely doing that. Okay. Rerolling one of these d20s. And it's a 16, so that's a failure. So I'm going to put an X in the number 4 on my piece of paper and not put anything, I guess, on here. I don't think I can make that into an X. No. Oh boy. So she has failed to convince the queen. What's more, I have generated a threat, which for my threat token, what do I have around here that can be used as a threat? I've got a Lego gear thingy. I'll use that as a threat. Why not? That's... I will use, to be blasphemous, a force die from the Star Wars RPG. Okay, so I've generated a threat. I have to spend it eventually to either create a complication or to increase the difficulty on a task. If you choose this, I have to roll 2 successes instead of the normal one. Okay. That's about what I expected. So, Commander Paulsen has failed. The Queen says, by no accounts will we allow anyone, Kitsen or otherwise, into the wreckage. Okay, fantastic. We're approaching the end of Act 1. The commander is going to return outside to speak with Captain Malik once again. And he is going to suggest that it would be awfully convenient if some member of the crew were interested enough to take an exploration of their own without telling anyone. And I think it's clear to him that he's suggesting that if Commander Paulsen does this on her own, that they would get in less trouble than if he was to order her into doing something. Let's see. And would this create any issues? I'll do anything to get back to the center chair. I think that she would be all on board for this. She would view this as perhaps sucking up a little more to her current captain. She's trying to get back to... There was an experience where she got a special commendation, and I had a thought that she was required to take command very briefly during that period. And now she's trying to get back to being a captain as quickly as possible. So I think that she would take this as a challenge and view this as an opportunity to prove herself both to her current captain, who, there's only so long one can stay captain of a starship, and he's, getting up there, as well as to prove to Starfleet that she's able to take initiative, which, fine. If things go badly, well, we might see that she gets set back a little bit and has a reprimand or something along those lines. So I think our next task, and this is going to lead us into Act 2, which is mostly going to be set on the wreckage. Our next task is going to be, let's see, getting past, how do we want to do this? Let's go to the probability table. I think it's about 50-50 whether the next task, the end of Act 1, is getting to the site where the wreckage is or getting into the wreckage itself. And I think I'm leaning more towards getting to the site. So we'll go with probable on that. And there's a chance that they have no issue. So we'll just roll for that. 12, yep, they got to get to the site. So they are transported back to the ship. Site-to-site transport is a little more difficult in the TOS era. So we are going to have Commander Paulsen roll for a... let's say there's a jamming beam. Let's use that. We're going to spend our threat. There's now a transporter scrambler at the site they're going to, at the wreckage. So as the ship... Let's see. I need to figure out how rolling for the ship works. Instead of having you watch me look through all the rules real quick, I'm going to pause once again, and we'll be back to see how all of this works if the ship, because I know in the original game the ship can assist, but I don't know if that works here. Alright, I might be wrong on this, but I don't believe the ship can actually assist. I think it's more of an either-or sort of thing. In this case, I think it makes more sense for, let's see, someone on the ship. Maybe our science officer should be the one to do the transporting. So in this case, I think we're going to set that to a 15. We'll say his reason is an 11, and his... actually, this would be the chief engineer. Let's see. Chief engineer. Let's control engineering for a transporter, if I remember right. Yeah, would have good control, would have to. And good engineering. So we'll call it a 15 once again. I don't want to go over and beyond what I should. So we need 15s. Not too bad. Well, we'll see. A 3 and a 6. That will be a success, considering our threat to increase the difficulty here. So they're successfully going to punch through the transporter jamming at the wreckage. And in this case, we want a small party. I think we would once again have, obviously it's Commander Paulsen, Petty Officer Bassett, and I think Lieutenant DeWitt would make the most sense again as well, our science officer. There's some sort of wreckage here. It could make sense to have the chief engineer, but in this case, because they don't know, well, let's see, 50-50 shot. It is also useful to note that a lot of the officers of this crew are very young. They have had a lot of turnover recently. It is not uncommon for a Shepard-class ship to be a very brief stopping point. They are not generally given the most impressive of missions. So the chief engineer is only a lieutenant. The helm officer is a very young ensign. Science officer is a lieutenant, but he's in his mid-30s. Chief medical officer is one of the only ones who's actually experienced, but she's been on board the Jemison for longer than anybody, even the captain. And she's a full commander. So everybody on the crew is young, and I did everything random on these names, genders. They're all human, just because, again, TOS, you don't see many non-human crew members. So if it's the science officer, we'll say yes, 1 to 10. That's Lieutenant DeWitt. And if it's the engineer, that would be Lieutenant Diana Reardon. That'll be 11 to 20. Okay, it is DeWitt. Which makes sense. The chief engineer is the one doing the transporting. So that is just fine. So that does end Act 1. The crew gets transported down, the 3 of them. They have taken off their Starfleet insignia. They're wearing chain of command style black jumpsuits, black hats, that sort of thing. And so we end Act 1, and we're going to end this video, as we're now just about 7 minutes shy of an hour long, a little bit longer than I intended to go. With that point in time, they've transported down into the wreckage, and in the next video, which I'm probably going to start right now, I just want to break these up into bite-sized chunks, we will see what happens in the wreckage. All right, we'll see you in the next one.